I didn't move in with my son to become a burden. I moved in because grief had turned the house I shared with my husband into a museum of last times. Last shirt on the back of a chair, last grocery list on the fridge, last coffee cup turned upside down to dry. After the funeral, the rooms echoed, and I could hear myself unraveling. When Daniel insisted, "Mom, come stay with us for a while, we'll figure things out together," I took it as permission to breathe. I packed the photo albums, my winter coat, and the tea kettle with the whistling bird he'd grown up listening to on Saturday mornings. Everything else, I promised myself, could wait. From the curb, their blue-sided colonial looked like an invitation to start over, a trimmed lawn, a brass door knocker, and warm light blooming through the kitchen window. Inside, it was a different kind of museum, of a life I didn't recognize as my son's. Labels on pantry jars. Calendars layered with color-coded blocks. A charging station for devices that never seemed to stop buzzing. The house had its own heartbeat, and I felt my pulse trying to match it. "Your room's upstairs," said Mara, my daughter-in-law, her smile neat and careful, like ribbon tied too tight. "We set you up in the guest room, fresh sheets, extra blankets, bathrooms at the end of the hall." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, balancing a box against my hip. "I don't need much." "That's good," she answered, already glancing toward the stove, where something simmered according to an unspoken schedule. She was kind, efficient, and, if I am honest, tensed at the edges. Grief can do that, so can sharing a house. We ate at the kitchen island. Daniel asked about my drive, my neighbors, the mail I'd forwarded. The ordinary questions wrapped me like a blanket until I caught the tiny seam. Each time I answered, he searched Mara's eyes for approval. Not for content, approval. I tucked the observation away. When life has broken once, you learn to store small cracks for later. My room was a generous rectangle with a window that watched the maple in the front yard. I set the tea kettle on the dresser and opened one of the boxes labeled photos. I promised myself I'd only look at the top album. I didn't make it to page 5. Harold's hand, my husband's hand, rested on the back of my neck in our favorite picture, a wedding snapshot taken between poses, when the photographer sneezed and I started laughing. I felt the air go thin. I closed the book and walked to the hallway, following the scent of rosemary and roasted chicken, following life. I heard it before I reached the stairs, the soft friction of voices not intended to travel. "Just boundaries," Mara whispered. Cabinet hinges breathed. The refrigerator sighed. "We need them." "She just got here," Daniel said, quieter. "She's Mom." "I know," she replied, and in the 2 syllables I heard something that wasn't unkind but wasn't welcoming either. "But this can't be indefinite." Silence, the kind that turns a hallway into a wire pulled tight. Then Mara again, lower, controlled, "And she can't hear that conversation." I took a step back before my foot found the squeaky board. The kettle-shaped bird on my dresser felt suddenly foolish. I had told myself I was here temporarily, a guest until I could decide what to do with the life left behind. Standing on their staircase, I realized I might be the problem no one wanted to name. Hook, or call it survival. I rehearsed a different version for when I turned the corner. Praise the smell of dinner, compliment the lighting, ask about the basil plant by the window. Pretend I hadn't heard anything that would keep me awake at 3 a.m. tomorrow. I told myself, I'll make a plan. Tonight, I'll be grateful. Grief makes bargains. It never signs them. We ate at the table. We stacked dishes in quiet choreography. When Mara wiped the counters, she folded the cloth as if precision could keep us from fraying. Daniel carried my box up the last few steps and set it by the door. He hugged me longer than usual, and when he pulled away, his face arranged itself into something I recognized from childhood, the look he wore before telling me about a scraped knee or a broken window. "We're glad you're here, Mom," he said. "Really." "I know," I lied. "Kindness is a kind of truth too." The first night, the house taught me its sounds. The heater clearing its throat, the neighbor's car door at 10:22. The maple scattering small shadows on the ceiling when the wind shifted east. At 2:11, I woke to the faint hum of the dishwasher and the sharp, metallic click of text message vibrations. At 2:13, a door eased open down the hall. At 2:14, footsteps, a pause outside my room, then away. It could have been anyone. It could have been no one at all. Grief also makes ghosts. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the slam of a school bus door 3 houses down. I made tea with the bird kettle because ritual is the rope you climb when you can't find the stairs. Mara's calendar was already full. PT call 9 o'clock, grocery pickup, Daniel, shift change, 6:30 dinner. Beneath it, a sticky note in neat blue letters, ask mom about meds. Another note, folded once, we should talk, about time frame. I smiled into my mug the way actors smile to an empty theater. Of course, I whispered, of course you should. Before lunch, I took a slow walk to map the neighborhood in my feet, right at the maple, left at the mailbox with the dent. The air was a bright, cool sheet, the sky held itself together because someone had to. When I returned, I slipped my shoes off by the door and paused at the threshold. The house listened, so did I. From the kitchen came the quick chop of a knife, water running, and then, from the open archway, a voice not meant for me. We'll call the place this week, Mara was saying, just to ask questions. The place? Daniel asked. You know what I mean. A pause that turned my name into a weight neither of them wanted to lift. Rehook, it's one thing to fear you've overstayed a welcome. It's another to hear the word, place, spoken softly enough to sound like mercy and sharply enough to mean somewhere you don't choose. I didn't step through the archway. Not yet. I stood with my palm against the wall, feeling the faint vibration of water through copper. I told myself I would start with grace. I would ask for a chore list. I would volunteer grocery runs. I would turn the kettle bird down so it only whispered. I would, until there was no polite future left to rearrange. If you're new here, take a second to subscribe. The next minutes matter, because the conversation I overheard that afternoon wasn't the worst of it. It was only the door left ajar. What waited on the other side did more than change where I lived. It rewrote what I thought I knew about loyalty, about love stretched thin, about how far a family will go to avoid the truth waiting at the bottom of a coffee cup. And if you're wondering why a woman who can read her own heartbeat in the dark didn't march into that kitchen and demand a verdict, I'll tell you, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is listen long enough to hear the part no one wanted to say. What I heard, later that night, when the house had the decency to pretend it was asleep, was not a plan. It was a secret, and secrets, in families, are not buried. They are planted. Tomorrow, I'd ask for a conversation. Tonight, the maple wrote shadows on my ceiling that looked, for a moment, like a door swinging open. The next morning began with the sound of cups colliding softly on the counter. My son's voice floated up the staircase, hushed and uncertain. I lingered in my room longer than necessary, pretending to fix the hem of a sweater that didn't need fixing. When I finally stepped into the hallway, the air felt different, quiet, but not peaceful. Like the space between thunder and lightning. Mara greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Morning, Mom. Coffee's fresh. Do you want eggs or toast? Just tea, I said, forcing warmth into my tone. I wanted to believe her cheerfulness was real, but my ears still echoed with yesterday's whispers. Boundaries. Time frame. The place. Daniel kissed his wife's cheek, then grabbed his jacket. Don't wait for me for dinner, he said. Late shift again. The door closed behind him, and the house exhaled. Mara rinsed the pan too thoroughly for a single fried egg. She moved like a woman rehearsing calm, every gesture calculated. I wondered if she realized I could see through the performance. You didn't sleep well? She asked, not turning around. I hesitated. I slept fine. The house makes new sounds, that's all. Old houses, she said, though the house was barely 10 years old. You get used to them. I took my tea to the sunroom, where morning lights softened the furniture into memories. Through the window, I saw Daniel's car turn the corner. Only then did Mara join me. She sat opposite, the table between us like a treaty neither of us had signed. I know this is an adjustment, she began, stirring her coffee though it was already cool. For all of us. Yes, I said, it is. I just want to make sure you're comfortable, and that we have clear expectations. There it was, the polite shape of eviction, dressed in courtesy. I nodded slowly. Of course. I don't want to interfere. Her smile brightened by a single what. You're not interfering. We just have routines. Work, privacy, you know. I do, I said, even though I no longer did. Privacy had become something other people owned. That afternoon, I baked. Old habits die slower than love. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the kitchen. For a moment, it almost felt like my own again. Mara passed behind me, her phone in her hand. A notification lit the screen, and before she turned it away, I saw a name I didn't recognize, Ellen, Senior Living Advisor. She caught me noticing, and for a second, our eyes locked. She smiled too quickly. Just work emails, she said. We're looking into something for a client. I nodded, though no one in this house had clients. That night, I lay awake listening to footsteps below, measured, pacing. Then, a soft voice near the vent. Mara again, on the phone this time. Her words rose in fragments through the metal grate like ghosts of a conversation. Yes, she's still here. No, I haven't told him yet. I just needed to feel like his idea. I pressed my hand against the vent, as if I could change what the air carried. My son's name wasn't spoken, but I heard it in every hesitation. Rehook. People think betrayal comes all at once, like glass shattering. But the truth is, it arrives in whispers, long before the crash. By morning, my tea tasted like resolve. I started making lists, things I could do to make myself useful, reasons to stay that no one could argue with. Laundry, gardening, child care, if only they had children. I wanted to belong the way furniture belongs, quiet, necessary, unthreatening. Mara noticed. You don't have to do chores, Mom, she said, almost gently. Oh, I like helping. She sighed. It's not about helping. It's about balance. Balance. The word tilted everything. That evening, Daniel came home early. I waited for him to mention their conversation, but he only asked what was for dinner and kissed my forehead, distracted. His phone buzzed, and he turned it face down. I recognized the same smile Mara had used earlier, tight, apologetic, practiced. When they went upstairs, I lingered in the kitchen, my hands buried in soapy water. I wasn't looking for anything, just cleaning, until I saw it, a folded brochure near the microwave. It was half hidden under a recipe book, but I knew the color, soft blue, comforting, deceitful. The kind they use for brochures about communities, not homes. Across the top, in cheerful font, Sunrise Haven, where every resident is family. My fingers trembled. I unfolded it carefully, reading each sentence twice, as if comprehension might change the words. Private rooms, 24-hour care, optional independence, warm, compassionate environment. The last page had a handwritten note. Tour available next Thursday, ask for Ellen. I didn't cry, I didn't even breathe for a moment. I folded the paper back exactly the way I found it and slid it under the book again. Then I turned off the light, climbed the stairs, and told myself the same lie I'd whispered at every funeral. This isn't happening. Not yet. If you're still with me, listen closely, because the next sound I heard in that house wasn't a whisper. It was a confession, not to me, but about me. I learned quickly that grief makes a house loud. Pipes sigh like tired lungs, the refrigerator mutters in its sleep, and floorboards memorize every footstep you shouldn't take. Those first weeks in my son's home, I moved like a trespasser in a museum of their life, careful not to smudge the glass, terrified of setting off an alarm I couldn't see. That morning, the alarm wasn't hidden at all. It was a voice, low and clipped, floating up the stairwell from the kitchen below. A single sentence made the hair lift on my arms. She was saying it would be cleaner if I left by spring. If you're new here, take a second to subscribe, because the moment you think you know a story like this, something small and ordinary tilts and the whole room changes. I stood at the landing, the banister cool beneath my palm, counting the beats of the kitchen clock around the corner as if the rhythm could keep me from being seen. The house had its geography of safety, 2 steps before the third creak, the shadow line where the hallway rug swallowed your feet, the brass register that breathed warm air and words at once. I stayed there, weightless, and listened to my life be measured out like flour in someone else's recipe. Not rage. Not even contempt. Just logistics. A facility tour of my removal, which room could become an office again, when the home care brochure would be presented, why my name on the lease had been avoided out of respect for everyone's boundaries. The language was thin ice, polite nouns skating over a black canal of intent. I thought of my husband's hands, how he'd turn a wrench with patience until the line unclogged and water ran clear. I'd always believed marriages could be repaired with effort and decent tools. But here I was, a widow, inventory in another woman's plan. At the bottom of the stair, I could see the edge of the kitchen island, a bowl of green apples bright as traffic lights, a folded dish towel so tight it left lines on itself. My son's voice entered then, lower, slower, carrying the gentle tone he used on clients and lost pets. He wasn't fighting. He was smoothing. I had taught him that tone, how to de-escalate, how to make peace with a world that rarely offered it. Hearing it deployed against me was like watching my own handwriting betray me on a forged check. There were no knives raised, no names thrown like bottles. The conversation stuck to weather and wellness and the vague moral imperative of stability. But under it, tags were being sewn to me. Fragile. Dependent. An adjustment period that had stretched too long. I pressed my thumb into the banister until the ridges in the wood pressed back. On the counter beyond the apples sat my husband's old coffee mug, the one I'd slipped into my bag the day the house was cleared. A small thing, clumsy with hairline cracks, now posing in someone else's still life. I could not remember the last time anyone had asked me how I took my coffee. Here's the rehook, I expected outrage in that moment. Fists on the table. Names. Laws. But grief doesn't always go to war. Sometimes it goes to the archive. Something in me began to catalog, in the crisp, unsparing way I used to audit labs before I retired. What day had I first seen the envelope from a facility peeking from the mail stack? Which drawer swallowed the spare keys after I'd borrowed them? Why had the dishwasher detergent been changed to pods when I just bought powder? The inventory became its own spine. If they were drawing a blueprint, I would read the legend. The house shifted around us as if it too were listening, heater kicking on, a car door slamming 2 streets over, a dog barking and then apologizing to itself. And then, amid the ordinary noise, I heard a sentence I will never forget, because it contained the exact geometry of my son's fear. He said he was tired of being between 2 loyalties. The math told itself. One loyalty was the woman with whom he'd built a life and a mortgage. The other was the woman who had taught him to add. He sounded like a boy with a backpack too heavy to carry, standing at the bus stop in the rain, and for the first time, I felt something besides injury. I felt the cold intimacy of a choice he did not want to make, and the fact that, for weeks, he'd been letting the house make it for him. I didn't move. The apple bowl receded. The mug did not glow with rescue. I thought about the social worker at the hospice who had said, in her efficient, kindly way, that transitions are sticky. As if grief were a jar you could pry open with a spoon. After my husband died, I had slipped from wife to widow with all the grace of a plate leaping from a shelf. Landing here had felt like a soft surface at first, grandchild laughter, a calendar to write on, a nightlight in the hallway. Now the softness had seams. I imagined myself tripping on them in June, an overnight bag in my hand, a bouquet of promises wrapped in cellophane. We'll visit every Sunday. We'll bring the boy. It will be good for you. The kind of lies that work because portions of them are true. I backed away from the stair and returned to my room, as if I could undo what I'd heard by restoring my body to where it had been before. The room smelled faintly of lavender and laundry steam. I sat on the bed and placed my hands on my knees like a student, and the air fan traced a pale stripe across my ankles. On the dresser, my husband's glasses stared back, round and useless. There had been a time, 40 years of times, when a problem arrived and I could tilt it toward him, listening to it click into solvable shape between us. Widowhood had taught me a different posture, shoulders squared against a wind no one else felt, chin level, boots flat. You can grow brave without ever wanting to. The rational part of me made a neat list, talk to an attorney about tenants' rights. Request copies of any placement brochures, locate my own medical power of attorney, call the bank. The part of me that still had a pulse for myth did something stranger. I opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand and took out the thing I hadn't told anyone I'd kept, a pale blue folder from my son's childhood. 2nd grade. Parent-teacher conference notes. Drawings with sons that had eyelashes. A report card with a single comment that had bothered me then and had never quite let me go. He assumes responsibility for others' feelings. I had saved it because I'd been proud. Now, handling the paper that had yellowed at the edges, I understood its shadow. The boy who apologized for weather was now a man apologizing for my presence. Another rehook, because you deserve it. The blue folder was not the only thing in that drawer. Beneath it lay an envelope I didn't recognize, unsealed, with my name written in my husband's square, steadfast hand. I had not seen it before. I cannot tell you why I hadn't. My grief had been a flood and there were so many things to build arcs for. The envelope contained 3 objects, a key, a photocopy of a deed, and a note. The key was unremarkable except for the small notch filed near the head, a craftsman's mark my husband used when he didn't want a lock mix-up. The deed was for a storage unit near our old neighborhood, paid for 5 years in advance. The note said only this: if you ever feel like a guest in your own life, go open what I couldn't bring home. The clock downstairs chimed the hour. Footsteps crossed tile. Somewhere, a chair slid back. My son laughed, a careful little laugh, end punctuation to a negotiated sentence. I sat with the key in my palm until the metal warmed. For weeks I had been hovering at thresholds, listening to other people define the borders of my future. Now there was a door only I could open, in a building that smelled like dust and cardboard and second chances. The house hummed. The banister waited. The polite nouns downstairs kept skating. Spring wasn't here yet. The map, however, had changed. And that is where I leave you, on the edge of a lock I did not know existed, with a key cut by the only person who ever taught me how to hold steady without hardening. The confession I wasn't supposed to hear had reached me. What it unlocked had just begun that I didn't sleep that night. The key lay on my nightstand like a heartbeat outside my body, ticking in silence, waiting for me to be brave. The house was too still, the kind of stillness that made you wonder if time had stopped out of pity. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed, a pipe clinked once, then held its breath. I kept hearing my husband's voice in that hush, the way he used to say, some things can't be fixed, only faced. By morning, I knew I had to go. I told Daniel and Mara I was visiting an old friend from the church. Daniel smiled, distracted, already checking his phone. Mara asked when I'd be back but didn't wait for an answer. I packed light, just a sweater, my purse, and the letter. The key felt heavier than both combined. The bus ride across town was quiet. The world outside looked washed out, as if someone had drained the color from it overnight. I hadn't been to that part of the city in years, where warehouses leaned against each other like tired men, and the air smelled of oil and dust. The storage facility sat at the end of a long, gravel road. A sign hung crookedly over the entrance, Safekeep Units, since 1983. Irony never aged well. The clerk barely looked up when I handed him the deed. Unit 117, he said. Hasn't been accessed in over 5 years. 5 years. That would have been the winter before my husband's first hospital stay. The thought made my throat tighten. I followed the metal corridor, each footstep echoing like a decision I couldn't take back. Rows of identical doors stretched ahead, pale gray and uninviting. When I reached 117, my hand trembled so badly the key almost slipped from my grip. It fit perfectly. No resistance. No rust. As if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the light flickered once before settling into a weak glow. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and cedar. There weren't boxes stacked to the ceiling, no furniture, no forgotten treasures, just one wooden trunk, dark and heavy, placed exactly in the center of the floor. My knees nearly gave out. It was our trunk, the one from the attic of our first house, the one I thought we'd lost when we moved after the flood. The brass latch still bore the dent from where Daniel, as a child, had dropped his toy hammer on it. I knelt before it, my hands hovering above the lid. I hesitated. What was I expecting? Letters? Photographs? Proof that my husband had loved me the way I needed to believe he did? When I finally lifted the lid, the scent of mothballs and dust rose like ghosts. Inside were folders, labeled in my husband's precise handwriting, the kind he used when he wanted things remembered, not questioned. Daniel, 1987. Property deeds, confidential. Insurance. And one more, tucked underneath the rest, so faintly written it was almost invisible. For her, if she ever feels alone. My vision blurred. I lifted the folder, feeling the weight of every unanswered question I had carried since his death. Inside were photographs, letters, receipts, and something else, a single sealed envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was shaking, unlike his usual steady script. A smudge of ink near the bottom told me his hand had trembled when he signed it. I sat on the cold concrete floor and turned the envelope over in my lap, tracing the edges like a relic. It wasn't just paper. It was a boundary, between what I had believed about my life and what was actually true. But here's the hook, I didn't open it. Not yet. Because sometimes the truth isn't ready for the light. And sometimes, neither are we. As I left the unit, the air outside felt colder. The world seemed heavier with secrets. I locked the door again and slipped the key back into my pocket, where it pressed against my skin like a second pulse. I didn't know it then, but that key wasn't the only thing my husband had left behind. The next discovery would not come from the past, it would come from the house I was trying to escape. I returned to my son's house the way people return to a church they no longer believe in, quietly, respectfully, not sure if they belong. The door eased shut behind me with that careful hush new construction gives expensive hinges. The thermostat hummed. The refrigerator clicked. The silence did not comfort, it arranged itself around my shoulders like a coat I hadn't chosen. If you're following this story and want the next chapter the moment it's out, hit subscribe and keep the notifications on. Now, back to the house that didn't feel like home. Grief blurs edges, yes, but it also sharpens certain lines. I noticed every small dissonance that afternoon. The lemon oil I'd rubbed into the banister yesterday had been overruled by a sharper smell, bleach, faint and recent. The runner on the stairs was straightened, but the nap lay in two directions, like a bed smoothed too quickly. A glass on the counter held a thin meniscus of water and one fingerprint. The dishwasher was running with nothing inside. On the table sat the unsealed envelope from the attorney, heavy with the weight of paper and outcomes. I still hadn't opened it. Not because I feared what it contained, I feared who it would name. Legal language has a way of turning family into categories. Petitioner. Interested party. Caregiver. In my field notes from a lifetime of teaching, I once wrote, "Words can soften truth until it disappears." Today I suspected the opposite. Today, words might make truth hard enough to hurt. I set my purse down and did what I always do when the world tilts, I worked. I folded a throw. I aligned salt and pepper. I checked expiration dates in the fridge. An order of curry on the bottom shelf had my son's handwriting on the lid, "Don't eat, meeting at 7." The date was yesterday. He hadn't come home until after 11. Small things tugged at me. The framed photo of my wedding, usually anchored between the lamp and the stack of cookbooks, had been shifted an inch to the left. The dust oval it left behind made a thin halo on the console. Under the photo, the key bowl was empty. My house key was in my purse. Their spare had been there last night. Now it was not. I walked down the hall toward the guest room, toward my suitcase and the orthopedic shoes I never wanted. The floorboard just before the threshold always spoke up under weight, an easy sound, a brief complaint. Today it didn't. I stopped. Stepped back. There it was. One step forward again, nothing. Knees used to bending for grandchildren and then for grief lowered me to the seam where two planks met. The right-hand board had a darker edge, a faint crescent where finish had chipped. Someone had lifted it recently. I told myself families hide things all the time. Spare cash. Old letters. Anniversary gifts from outlets, wrapped in tissue that pretends to be silk. But the night I heard my daughter-in-law say, "She doesn't belong here," had split the house open along a fault line I hadn't known was under us. Since then, every sound carried aftershocks. I stood and walked the first floor in a slow, deliberate loop, the way nurses walk a ward at shift change. I took inventory. In the mudroom closet, a new box of contractor-grade trash bags stood beside the reusable shopping totes, an odd pairing, like tuxedo shoes with gym socks. On the laundry shelf, a bottle of enzyme cleaner had been used down to a quarter. On the fridge, the family calendar still showed last month. 2 dates circled in red had been crossed out and scribbled over. The pen strokes pressed so hard they left grooves you could feel with your finger. On the kitchen desk lay a cheap spiral notebook my son used for home projects. I flipped to the back and found a list written in his careful block letters: call facility, verify waitlist length. Ask about assessments. Medicaid look back? My breath faltered. I read the line again and made myself stay on the surface of it. People research options. Good sons think ahead. They plan. It doesn't mean they decide. I don't know how long I stood like that, pen indentations under my fingertips, looking at a future someone else was writing. A fact from an AARP brief I once cited floated up, unsummoned. Most long-term care in America is provided by family, unpaid, often women over 60. Another statistic: adult children underestimate the cost of assisted living by nearly half. Knowledge is a poor cushion, but it is something to sit on while you choose to breathe. When the dishwasher cycle beeped, I started. I opened it. Steam billowed. 1 teaspoon lay in the rack like a small apology. Back in the hall, that floorboard stayed silent under my foot. I returned to it as the afternoon light slid from bright to honest. Inside the guest room, I pulled the bed aside with both palms, inch by inch. The rug bunched, the frame complained, the headboard knocked the wall. 3 dull thuds like a door someone closes gently after deciding not to say what they came to say. The plank lifted with a butter knife and patience. Underneath, a shallow cavity. Inside, a velvet pouch, dusty at the corners, and a plastic envelope sealed with painter's tape. My first instinct was to put it back. To be the kind of mother who trusts, the kind of mother who does not lift boards in a house that isn't hers. Then another statistic cut across conscience. In elder financial abuse cases, the perpetrator is a family member in 2/3 of reports, usually under the same roof. Facts don't accuse. They warn. I sat on the floor and opened the velvet pouch. A ring rolled into my palm, a man's band, heavy, engraved inside with our wedding date and the words steady and true. My husband had been buried with his ring. The air left me. Alongside it lay a safety deposit box key attached to a tag from a bank 2 towns over. The handwriting on the tag was my husband's, small and stubborn. The plastic envelope held photocopies, a durable power of attorney drafted years ago, never used. A letter from a neurologist recommending evaluation, dated 6 months before my husband died, and a list of account numbers with balances scribbled beside them. Some numbers had asterisks. One had been circled, then X'd out, then circled again. I put the band between my thumb and forefinger, and time folded. The church steps in June. Rice. Sunday. His hands young and nervous. His voice promising what he could not have known it would mean. The ring warmed in my palm as if it remembered skin. Downstairs, a car door shut. Voices threaded through the central air, my son's lower register, my daughter-in-law's clipped efficiency. I slid the plank back into place, smoothed the rug, tugged the bed flush to the wall, and put the velvet pouch in my cardigan pocket where keys used to live. The plastic envelope went under my sweater, flat against a heart I wished were less noisy. In the kitchen, I made the motions: kettle, cups, tea. When they came in, the house flexed around them the way a well-trained dog recalibrates to a new master's pace. I placed cups on saucers and read the air. My son's eyes flicked to the table, to the envelope from the attorney. My daughter-in-law's gaze moved over the counters, over the sink, over me, taking measurements I couldn't see but could feel. "We ran late," she said. "Traffic." "Of course," I said. "In families, of course, is a neutral ground where you can stand without admitting anything." I watched my boy put his hand on the chair back, then lift it, then put it back, a gesture he'd had since childhood when words pressed inside him like a bruise. He inhaled to speak. The kettle began to sing. Small reprieves are the oldest mercy. We drank in quiet. I asked about work. She answered about schedules. He said the project was moving. I said the roses in the yard should be cut back by Friday. Ordinary syllables stitched a thin seam across a widening tear. When the cups were empty, they moved to the living room. I stayed in the kitchen and listened to the house decide what it remembered. My fingers found the ring in my pocket, turning it until the engraving caught my skin, steady and true. Below my feet, a plank I had lifted lay returned, but not forgotten. Beneath that, a space built into a house that had welcomed me and would, if I let it, make room for my absence. I could open the envelope. I could ask about the notebook. I could say, "I heard you in the kitchen 2 nights ago." I am not furniture you can move without asking. Instead, I stood over the seam in the floor and let the zygarnik of it all do what it does, leave the mind reaching for a thread it cannot stop pulling. Night gathered at the windows. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. I laid my palm on the plank and felt its faint give, the compliance of wood to pressure, of a mother to history, of a home to whoever speaks most confidently within it. Tomorrow I would take the key to the bank. Tomorrow I would open what my husband left, the part of him that planned for a future he wouldn't see. Tonight, I closed the dishwasher, turned off the light, and carried 3 cups to the sink as if they were precious. In their porcelain weight, in the unbroken rim, I found the smallest, sharpest truth: things don't survive because they are strong. They survive because somebody refuses to set them down. I did not sleep, not really. But I learned the new sounds of the house, the shift of wood cooling at midnight, the small sigh the guest room makes when a bed is moved back exactly where it was, the way a ring in a pocket announces itself every time you breathe. I didn't mean to listen at doors anymore. Grief had already made me small enough, eavesdropping carved me smaller. But the kitchen had taught me too well, my daughter-in-law's whisper like a blade against glass, my son's silence the cloth to muffle it. So when the letter from Hawthorne and Bell, attorneys at law, arrived addressed to estate of Daniel Pierce, my late husband, my one steady compass, I carried it to my room like contraband, and I locked the door not to keep anyone out but to keep myself in. That thick envelope was a sealed room, and I stood outside it with the breath of a trespasser. I opened it the way you touch a scar you know by memory. Inside, a photocopy of a will, a cover note from a junior associate with an apologetic tone, and a request that I bring photo ID to the bank where a safe deposit box awaited me. I read the will twice before I noticed the wrongness. It didn't land like an error so much as a tilt in the floorboards that made your whole body adjust. The signature, his name, familiar in its loops, lay too neat, too steady for the tremor that had begun the winter the cardiologist first said enlarged. The witness names were strangers. And the dates, 2 documents stapled together, one revoking a trust we'd built when the mortgage still smelled of fresh paint, the other reinstating provisions that handed nearly everything to my son, for the comfort and care of his household. My name was there, yes, like a courtesy chair pulled out and placed at the far edge of a crowded table, a modest annuity, a polite allowance, the shape of support without its weight. I remember thinking, it isn't that he would never have done this, it's that he would never have done it this way. Daniel was the kind of man who labeled the backs of photographs with names and months and weather. He left paper trails like breadcrumbs for the future versions of us to follow back home. This will was a path someone had drawn after dark. At the bank, the lobby smelled like coins and carpet cleaner, a sterile confidence. The manager, a woman with soft hands and a name tag that felt too cheerful for the vault she guarded, escorted me to a private room with a table and 2 chairs. The box, long and narrow, slid open with the indifferent grace of something that had outlived sentiment. Inside lay a stack of folders, rubber-banded bundles of statements, and, incongruously, a small black notebook tied shut with twine as if it could run. Here is what I knew in my bones and what I learned in the next slow hour. Grief is not only sorrow, it is administration. It is signatures, keys, witnessed inventory. The manager left me alone with the pale light and the quiet ticking of climate control. I opened the first folder. Property tax receipts, accurate. Insurance policy, updated 6 months before his hospitalization. Then came something that made my mouth go dry, a notarized letter appointing my son as temporary financial agent dated 2 days after the cardiologist's will monitor. The language was precise as a scalpel. It did not cut me until I noticed the notary's stamp belonged to a firm across town my son's friend had once joined. Familiar circles, tight knots. I wanted a dramatic revelation, the kind that makes people gasp in courtrooms and living rooms. Instead, I was getting paper facts that nudged each other into a shape. This was planned by someone with access, urgency, and a confident hand. I kept telling myself that could still be Daniel. But then I untied the twine. The black notebook was an accountant's dream and a widow's map. Dates, times, mileage, names. He had recorded every appointment from the last year, every check cut for home repairs, every conversation with M.P. about refinancing the cabin we never actually refinanced. On one page, his handwriting falters, not in the letters, but in the spacing, as if his patience, not his hand, had trembled. Asked A about the new draft. Uncomfortable with clause 14. He says, standard. Don't sign until Mary reviews. I had been Mary then, wife, reader of small print, keeper of, wait, but why? Except I had never seen this draft. Clause 14 was news to me. I turned the page and found a receipt stapled there, the way Daniel always attached proof to memory. It was a consultation fee to Hawthorne and Bell, same firm, different associate, dated a week before our anniversary. The consultation note was clipped behind it in legal shorthand, but the gist was loud enough. Client concerned spouse is being positioned out of financial decision tree by adult child. Advises independent counsel. Declines to proceed today. The file smelled faintly of his aftershave, or maybe that was a trick of grief, the way a mind will conjure cologne from paper if it needs to breathe a person again. It would be simple here to make a villain and be done. But families don't fracture along clean lines, and betrayal often comes wrapped in necessity. Our son had done so much right in those months, rides to the clinic, pharmacy runs, the grave tenderness of sons who lift their fathers into bed and pretend it is no indignity. I remember those nights. I kept the sheets. What I didn't see, or refused to, was the way decisions shifted hands in the light of day, the way, just for now, becomes a season, year, a clause in a document I didn't read because I was upstairs heating broth. The last folder held the will again, this time the wet ink original. I brought it close to my face like a grandmother reading a school play program. The ink had bled slightly at the loops, the way ink does when a hand pauses too long over an O, a P, a curve where the writer isn't sure if the letter belongs to them. My Daniel signature had always moved like a river that knew its bed. This one searched for the channel. I thought of the kitchen whisper. Get her to agree to assisted living. We can't keep doing this. I had imagined doing this meant grief, meals, logistics, the daily catechism of the bereaved. In the bank's small room, with the box open like a mouth, doing this expanded into something else, a house reassigned by fine print, a trust undone with a nod, a mother eased toward irrelevance by the soft hands of efficiency. There was no conspiracy here that could be shouted down, there was competence and proximity and a signature that wobbled. I photographed nothing. I took no copies. Instead, I did what Daniel taught me the day we signed our first mortgage and came home terrified of our own address. I wrote. On the back of the manager's business card, I listed the document titles, dates, stamp numbers, the associate's initials. I wrote the names of the witnesses and the notary. I wrote Clause 14, standard, and underlined it twice until the ink began to sink through. When the manager returned, I was composed in the careful way a stage is composed before the curtain lifts. I returned the folders in the order I'd found them, tied the notebook back with its faithful twine, and slid the box shut. All set? She asked, the kind of question that only has a polite answer. I said yes, and the vault door swallowed our conversation whole. Outside, afternoon light made the parking lot look like a set. Cars and their marks, extras crossing at prearranged angles, the sky a backdrop painted with weather. For a moment, I stood still and let the world arrange itself around the new center I was unwilling to admit. The will that directed my future might be my husband's in law, but not in spirit. The distinction wasn't academic. It was a path I would have to walk with shoes not meant for it. On the drive home, I counted red lights like rosary beads and let my mind do what minds do when they want to keep breathing, sort. There would be no scene in which I slammed the will on the kitchen table and demanded confession. My daughter-in-law would press her lips into that pale line. My son would say the saddest defense in any tongue, we thought it was best. And perhaps, in some careful calculus of resources and risk, it had been. But best had been balanced without the weight of me on the scale. Back in my small room, the one that used to be a guest room and now held my life in clean stacks, I spread my notes across the quilt I had stitched when we still believed every winter ended in spring. I copied the will's language from memory, not word perfect but close enough to feel the edge of it. I wrote a letter to myself, the way Daniel used to when he wanted to think straight. Do not speak yet. Verify first. Ask for the original drafting attorney, not the junior associate. Request signature exemplars. Find Mary, be Mary again. Outside my door, the house moved through its evening choreography. Their voices crossed in the hallway, soft, domestic, plausible. A drawer closed. The faucet ran. Somewhere, a phone chimed and was silenced. In that ordinary music, I heard the quiet audacity of what I was about to do, refuse the role I had been gently placed in and pick up the pen my husband had put down when his hand grew tired. The first ring to Hawthorne and Bell picked up to a menu of choices. I pressed 0 for operator. My voice, when it came, surprised me. It had the steadiness of a woman who read labels and saved receipts and, when necessary, learned the language of clauses. I said my name. I asked for the original attorney of record on my husband's older will, not the new one. And when the operator hesitated, I said the only sentence that made every door in a law office open: I'll hold. Perhaps it was the exactness of the dates, or the way I supplied the witness names without needing to check, or perhaps it was the universe's small apology for the kitchen whisper, but I was put through. A calm voice greeted me, older, textured by years of explaining complicated things to people sitting very still. When I said my husband's name, the voice exhaled a memory. Yes, he remembered Dan. Yes, he remembered the trust. No, he had not drafted anything revoking it. He paused, and paper rustled. I don't have a record of the later filings, he said. But if you bring what you have, I can tell you what you're looking at. I thanked him and ended the call before my composure cost me interest. Then I lay back on the quilt and stared at the ceiling where we had painted constellations for our grandson last summer. The figures I'd once traced for a child, Orion, Cassiopeia, the faint trail of Perseus, rearranged themselves into a new map, a widow, a will, a line of ink that wasn't a river anymore. Out in the hallway, footsteps approached and paused. A polite tap on my door. Her voice, gentle as steam. Tea? A kindness, or a ritual to keep the house in its lanes. I answered yes. There are battles one does not win by refusing water. When the cup arrived, white porcelain, mint rising, the saucer clinked against the nightstand. I thanked her and waited until her steps receded. Then I took the black notebook out of my bag, untied the twine again, and slid it under my pillow like a child hides a secret. Not because I feared theft. Because I needed at least one thing in this house to be exactly where I put it. I did not yet know which part of this would break my heart, the forgery I couldn't quite prove, or the authenticity of everyone's reasons. But I knew this much: tomorrow I would carry a will that looked like my husband's to a man who knew how he wrote when he still believed spring was guaranteed. And if he looked at the ink and said what the banker in my bones already had, I would stop being a guest in this story. The house settled. The mint cooled. Somewhere, a dishwasher clicked into its noisy prayer. I closed my eyes, and the last thing I saw was the loop of his D, hesitant, searching, like a question he never got to ask me. I didn't recognize the number, only the timing, right after dinner, when the house grows polite and brittle. "Mrs. Hale," the voice said, careful and dry, "this is Martin Levin. I represented your late husband years ago. We should talk." He didn't ask, he scheduled. The certainty in his tone felt like a summons, not an invitation, and I heard myself agree before I understood what that meant for me, for my son, for the woman who sighs in our kitchen when she thinks I've gone upstairs. Backhand index pointing right. If you're new here and you want the whole story as it unfolds, tap subscribe. It helps more than you think, and you won't miss what comes next. Levin's office occupied a wedge of a once grand building that pretended not to notice its chipped marble. I arrived early on purpose. Waiting rooms reveal more than confessionals: who calls whom, who avoids whose gaze, which door locks automatically. I sank into a leather chair with the confidence of a person who does not belong and watched the receptionist file me into the system like a misdelivered package. He came for me himself, thinner than the voice suggested, hair the color of paper warmed over a desk lamp. We shook hands like two people replaying an old scene we'd never actually performed. His office smelled faintly of carbon paper and dried mint. The blinds were half closed, as if secrets had their own light sensitivity. "Your message said there were irregularities," I began, carefully choosing a word that might cover everything and nothing. "There were," he replied, and waited. He was the kind of man who still respected silence as evidence. He slid a folder toward me. Not one of those modern, immaculate things. This one had a crease and a thumb smudge near the tab: human artifacts. Inside, photocopies, dates, signatures. My husband's name appeared in neat print and in a looping script I knew too well, the way you know a beloved sleep breath by its rhythms. Except here, the loops were too eager. The H rose awkwardly, as if standing on tiptoe to look competent. "Is it forged?" I asked, though my body already knew. "In places," he said. "In other places, it's him." Mixed. That's the most common kind of lie, the kind that leans on a little truth, so the weight distributes. He explained what my son's wife likely already knew: joint accounts shifted under temporary hardship provisions, a home equity line that appeared for 6 months and then disappeared like a shy guest, a medical authorization form signed on a date that didn't love the hospital's records. The versions of my husband on these pages felt like a chorus that couldn't agree on the melody. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. It wasn't accusation so much as arithmetic. This plus this is supposed to equal that, and it didn't. "Because," he said, folding his hands carefully, "I'm no longer bound in the same way I was. Your husband released me from certain confidences in a letter he never mailed. It arrived yesterday in a box of old files sent from storage. I'm interpreting his intent in your favor." I let the phrase sit. In your favor is the kind of kindness that costs the speaker a sliver of safety. "Show me," I said. The letter was 1 page. It was not a confession. It was a map that only makes sense after you've already traveled. He wrote about pressure, about bridge loans, about short-term fixes that breed long-term ghosts. He wrote about our son, kindly, imperfectly, and about the woman my son married. Not by name. By impact. "She is efficient with money," he wrote. But efficiency is not the same as stewardship. The room tilted gently, like a boat noticing the shoreline. "So he knew," I said. "He knew something was happening," Levin answered. "He did not know its full contour. Men like your husband tend to believe they can fix anything they understand, and they tend to misunderstand the things they love most." That took the air out of me in a gradual, decent way. I thought of the nights when the house settled into its evening bones and my son's wife filled the kitchen with soft, strategic laughter. I thought of the afternoon I pretended to nap so I could listen to the arithmetic of their whispers: insurance here, assisted living there, grief rendered as a solvable line item. Levin spoke again, slower, as if walking me to a threshold. "There's more. And this is where my caution fails me, because the law is one thing and conscience is another." He opened a second folder, thinner and meaner. A photocopy of a check endorsed in a hand that didn't match either mine or my husband's. A notarized letter from a facility 3 towns over, confirming a deposit on a priority placement assessment in my name, signed not by me, not by my son, but by my daughter-in-law as authorized representative. The date landed in the middle of my husband's last hospital stay, the week my son texted that I should focus on Dad while they handled logistics. I realized I'd gripped the chair's arm so hard my fingerprints had gone cold. They planned to move me, I said. Not a question. They planned to make it look necessary, he corrected gently. They were careful with language. Safety, fall risk, care burden. None of it outright false. All of it positioned. If you push a person toward an answer long enough, the answer thinks it chose itself. The world did not crack open. It adjusted its seam. So many betrayals arrived dressed as solutions. I didn't weep. Grief has its own schedule and it's rarely punctual. Instead, I did what widows learn to do, I catalogued. The dates. The amounts. The phrases in quotation marks, ready to be placed gently in front of anyone who insisted I'd misunderstood. Why involve me at all? I asked, returning to the beginning, to motive's shadow. You could have sent this to the state bar and washed your hands. He smiled the tired smile of a man who has laid his head on a desk at 2 a.m. more than once. Because paper rarely saves people. People save people. You'll make choices the paper can't. And there is something you should hear before you decide anything. He leaned back, considering whether to commit what looked like a small heresy. Your husband kept a separate notebook. Not secret, exactly, private. He logged conversations, dates, summaries, who said what. Sparing, but precise. He brought it to my office once and left it by mistake. I photocopied 2 pages because I feared he'd lose the originals. One of those pages mentions a name that will matter to you. He slid a single photocopy across. My husband's handwriting, no doubt now, the modest swing of his lowercase g, the tidy crossings of his T, recorded a conversation in our kitchen, 3 summers ago, after a barbecue when the evening light makes even tired people look generous. 3 lines down, a name. Not mine. Not my son's. A woman's name I did not recognize, followed by a short phrase, emergency fund transfer, ask ML to draft protection. The amount beside it was small enough to be plausible and large enough to be intention. Who is she? I asked, almost politely. I don't know, he said. But I do know this, the transfer did not come from any account tied to your household. It came from a business account your husband kept from before the marriage. If your daughter-in-law found out, she might see that as betrayal. She might also see it as leverage. I heard the rehook in my own chest, the story turning on a quiet hinge. Betrayal is not a straight line, it is a web. If you tug one thread, you don't know which spider moves. On the way out, I paused at the threshold and asked the question I hadn't let myself phrase. Is my son in this, or is he just near it? Levin looked at the blinds, at the light insisting through them. I cannot answer that for you. But I can tell you something I know from a lifetime of contracts. Proximity is a kind of consent, until it isn't. Sometimes the bravest thing a person does is refuse to be near what they cannot yet name. I walked home through a wind that made the trees sound like they were negotiating. The house greeted me with its tidy deceptions, mail stacked in thoughtful piles, a candle lit to imply welcome, a calendar on the fridge where my name had been written in cheerful ink under follow-up. My son's wife laughed from the kitchen, the exact laugh she uses on neighbors, the kind that can pass for kindness if you don't listen for the edges. I placed Levin's photocopies in the back of a cookbook my daughter-in-law never opens and made a pot of tea I did not want. Then I did the one thing the paper could not do for me. I dialed a number from the notebook copy and listened to it ring toward the woman whose name had no place in my marriage and every place in this story. Hello, she answered, wary and hopeful in the same breath. I said my name. I said my husband's. I said the date written beside hers in his careful hand. Silence learned my voice. Then she asked, very quietly, Did he ever tell you about our daughter? I didn't hear the knock, just the sound of Ellis's boots in the hall and the hush that follows bad news when it remembers its manners. By the time I reached the foyer, the woman was already inside, framed by the doorway like a portrait someone forgot to hang. Mid-20s, storm-gray eyes, a careful posture that said she understood both apologies and escape routes. Her coat was too light for the weather. Her knuckles were raw, as if she'd been clenching truths for miles. "My name is Mara," she said. "I think he was my father." There it was, no thunderclap, no operatic gasp. Just a sentence that adjusted the gravity in the room. I led her to the kitchen because grief is easier near a kettle. She didn't want tea but wrapped her fingers around the warm mug like everyone does when the world is too sharp to touch. I watched the steam rise and remembered the burner under my ribs the night I found the first clue, a recurring transfer in our bank archives marked ML Trust, small enough to hide inside routine, regular enough to be deliberate. Back then I told myself it was a business retainer, an old obligation, anything but a history with a pulse. It's astonishing how creative love can be when it wants a lie to live. Mara placed a thick envelope on the table. Inside were photocopies of a county birth certificate, a string of checks endorsed to a law firm, and a letter, yellowed at the edges, factual as an invoice, stamped with the same initials, ML. The letter confirmed what my husband never said, a settlement, renewed annually, tied to a confidentiality clause. The dates began 3 years before I met him and overlapped our entire marriage like a watermark. "He never came," she said, without accusation. But he never forgot the date. The room learned a new silence then, the kind that arrives when certainty steps outside for air. I'd always believed secrets had a shape, lipstick on a shirt, a hotel receipt, the cliché architecture of betrayal. This wasn't that. It was tidier and, somehow, crueler. He hadn't chosen 2 lives, he'd curated one and paid the archive fees on the other. I asked her how she found me. She said she didn't find me, she found the farm. The deed was public. The obituary told her where to knock. The lawyer stopped answering after he died, she added, tapping the letter. The payments stopped too. I didn't come for money. I came for a sentence I've never heard from anyone who knew him. What did he sound like when he laughed? Curiosity is a blade with 2 edges, one for the future, one for the past. I told her he had a laugh that couldn't decide if it wanted to be sunlight or thunder and often chose both. She closed her eyes and listened like you do when you're building a father out of syllables. A seam in her story bothered me, the way a new wall misaligns with an old foundation. The settlement began before me, the secrecy continued through me, but there was no proof of affection, no thread of contact beyond money and a rule, do not appear. I'd seen enough non-disclosure agreements in Joshua's war room to recognize the lawyer's handwriting. He'd been careful, thorough, a man who believed paper could immunize a heart. "Where's your mother?" I asked. "Gone," she said, not unkindly. "Years ago." She told me his name the night before she started hospice. Said she signed what she had to sign because she didn't want a scandal to become my inheritance. A scandal. The word felt antique, like lace pulled from an attic. We were not a family with scandals, only schedules, habits, phrases we revisited and repossessed like favorite rooms. Except we were. We are. The difference between myth and fact is always a person. I took her to the library because that's where the photographs live. I thought, foolishly, that maybe Joshua had hidden her in plain sight, some image I'd never read correctly. Page after page of our life, graduations, hospital bracelets, 100 holidays that did not know they were incomplete. I waited for anger, for envy, for the bone-deep humiliation I'd rehearsed since the bank printouts. It didn't arrive. What came instead was smaller and more honest, the realization that love can be faithful to a lie and still believe itself faithful. Mara traced a frame with her fingertip. "He looks like the kind of man who double-checks locks." "Did he?" "He did," I said, thinking of the safe beneath the stair, the bunker under the old barn, the videos cued like rosary beads for my first year alone. "He also double-checked goodbyes." She smiled at that, a quick, involuntary assent from a child's ledger. I had an impulse then, as inappropriate as it was automatic, to make her a sandwich, to send her home with soup and the sweatshirt you give guests who misread the season. Maternal instinct is a muscle memory, it doesn't ask for a birth certificate. Still, mercy without questions is not courage, it's laziness. I needed to know what I was forgiving. Why now? I asked. Why today, after all this time? Because secrets don't survive funerals, she said. They go looking for their names. It was the right answer and a terrible one. My husband had been meticulous, visionary even, in planning my grief, letters, passwords, a farm restored not for him but for me. He'd evaluated my sorrow like an engineering problem and built redundancies into the system. And then there was this, an omission so large it was practically architecture. I had been living inside a cathedral he designed, only to discover a wing he'd bricked over. I took a breath that felt heavier than air. What do you want from me, Mara? Proof I'm not a footnote, she said. Proof I'm not a mistake he repaired with money. The kettle clicked off, no one moved to pour. Outside, the horses shifted in their stalls, a soft percussion against the winter wood. I remembered the first morning after I arrived, the stall plaques engraved with names I hadn't chosen but already loved. Legacy, Joshua had called it. What you leave and what you rescue. Maybe this, too, was part of that definition, not just the acres and the oil and the art studio, but the people our decisions orphan. I unlocked the drawer where I'd been storing the thumb drives from Joshua's laptop, the daily videos he made for me, a calendar of his voice. I hadn't watched ahead since the night in the bunker. The next file's label was innocuous, month 2, day 16, but his eyes when the frame opened were not. They had that specific shine, the one people wear when they're about to say something that will rearrange the room. Kat, he began, if you haven't forgiven me yet, pause this and come back tomorrow. If you have, keep listening. Mara's hand went to her throat. I didn't pause. There's a trust labeled ML, he said. You found it by now. I wrote that letter. I wrote all the letters. You deserve the whole sentence. I was 19. It was before us. There was an agreement, her mother wanted anonymity, and I gave it because I thought responsibility and invisibility could coexist. I was wrong. I thought I could pay for absence. I've spent 2 decades paying interest on that lie. He didn't cry. Joshua almost never cried. But his jaw did that thing it did, the muscle working like it was grinding stone. I never told you because I didn't know how to tell you without breaking the life I was trying to protect. I kept thinking I'd find the right year to confess, the year with less work, less worry, less storm. There wasn't one. There never is. If she comes to you, be kinder than I was to myself. If she doesn't, be kind anyway. He looked away then, at something off camera. I left you land and letters. I hate that I also left you this. The screen went dark. The room did not. Mara was very still. I was very tired. 2 truths can stand in the same doorway and not touch. The husband who loved me so completely he engineered a year of companionship past his death, and the boy who signed a paper that turned a child into a ledger entry. Both are Joshua. Both are the map. I printed the bank records I'd already reconciled, the legal letter, the portion of the video I knew she would need for nights without witnesses. I wrote my number on a card and slid it under the paperclip. You're not a footnote, I said. You never were. But I can't be your proof alone. We'll find more. She nodded, as if accepting a verdict she hadn't wanted but recognized as fair. At the door, she paused. There's one thing you haven't asked, she said. I've asked everything I can survive today. Whether I want to be part of your life, she said. Whether you want to be part of mine. The horses stamped again, impatient, alive, asking for the ordinary miracle of hay and water. I realized then that the most dangerous secret hadn't been hers, or Joshua's. It was mine, the part of me that already wanted to claim her, to put a plate at the table and a stocking on the mantel and an extra helmet by the tack room door. The part that knew how quickly love becomes a habit. Come back for dinner, I said. No questions. No answers. Just food. We'll practice telling the truth slowly. She smiled then, small, exhausted, relieved by the shape of a beginning. After she left, I stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the kettle cool, to the house remember its old breathing. On the table, the envelope lay open, the paper inside whispering its dry arithmetic. In the barn, a stall latch clicked. Somewhere beneath us, in the bunker with its careful maps, were the coordinates of a life designed against disaster. And yet the thing that undid me wasn't an explosion or a lawsuit. It was a birth certificate. Hook, again, if the daughter he tried to erase has my eyes, what else in this house has my name and hasn't told me yet? I set the table like a woman rehearsing for peace. 3 plates. 3 knives. The same old napkins folded into their stubborn triangles. From the hallway, the clatter of their whispers slipped through the air vents like the scent of bleach, domestic, precise, and meant to erase something. They didn't know Mara had come. They didn't know my husband's ghost now spoke in video files. And they didn't know that I had finally stopped being afraid of silence. The chicken cooled untouched. The candlelight softened the truth into something almost polite. My son arrived first, jacket half on, guilt still damp on his skin. My daughter-in-law followed, perfume strong enough to build a wall between us. Smells good, Mom, he said. A sentence too easy, rehearsed somewhere between pity and performance. Sit, I said. We have things to chew on before the food. The fork in her hand hesitated, a metal heartbeat against porcelain. I didn't raise my voice, I let it travel, steady and cold, like a note struck on glass. I went through your father's old papers, I began. And then his lawyers. You remember Mr. Levin. My son's eyes flinched, the way they did when he was 6 and caught in a lie about the broken window. Mom. Don't, I said. Not yet. I told them about the signatures. The forged forms. The bank transfers that wore compassion like a disguise. I watched understanding flicker across their faces, not surprise, not outrage, but the sharp calculation of people wondering how much I knew, and how soon I might stop talking. Then I told them about Mara. For a moment the room forgot to breathe. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, that steady, unblinking witness. She's his daughter, I said softly. And whether you like it or not, that makes her family. My daughter-in-law leaned back, smile brittle as lacquer. You can't just take in some stranger because she claims. She didn't claim anything, I cut in. Your father-in-law did. On camera. That word. Camera, did something to her face. It drained it of performance. She turned to my son, eyes sharp with panic, as if the truth itself might be contagious. What did you do? She whispered. Not to me. To him. He stared at the table, at the candle flame bending in the draft. I thought, he began. Then stopped. Then began again. I thought we were protecting you. Protecting me from what? From everything falling apart, he said. From the bills. The debt. The inconvenience of my grief? My voice broke like porcelain. Or just the noise of it? No one moved. The air thickened. In another life, this might have been the moment I cried. Instead I laughed, quietly, like someone who's finally found the punchline in a tragedy. You planned to send me to a home, I said. A facility. The paperwork's in my husband's file. Signed by her. I nodded toward the woman who still hadn't put her fork down. My daughter-in-law's lips parted, ready to perform regret, but I didn't give her the stage. You forged my name, I said. You reduced me to an expense category. It wasn't like that, she said, voice trembling at the edges of dignity. Then how was it? Her silence was an admission dressed as exhaustion. I looked at my son, the boy who used to collect broken bird wings and ask me how to fix them. You watched her do it, I said. You let her. He nodded once. It was enough to end a war. The house settled around us, wood creaking like an old throat. Finally, I placed a small envelope on the table, the one Mara had left behind. Inside was her mother's letter, my husband's acknowledgement, and the proof of everything they'd chosen not to see. I'm not angry, I said, and meant it halfway. I'm done being managed. I'm done being pitted. This house doesn't need 3 ghosts. My son looked up, tears balancing on the fault line of his jaw. What are you going to do? I already did it, I said. I transferred the farm. Half goes to Mara. The other half stays with me until I decide who deserves to live here. My daughter-in-law gasped, a sound that belonged in a courtroom, not a kitchen. I've also called the bank, I added. And the lawyer. You'll both have time to find somewhere new. You can't, she started, voice rising. I can, I said, calm as prayer. And I did. I stood. The candle sputtered, then steadied again. Dinner's getting cold. Eat if you want. I've lost my appetite. I walked out before they could find the right words to hate me with. Behind me, I heard a fork fall and bounce once on the hardwood, small, metallic, final. Upstairs, I closed the door and let the quiet return to its rightful owner. In the reflection of the dark window, I saw my husband's face for just a moment, then mine behind it, older, clearer, still standing. And somewhere outside, the horses stirred. A life, waiting to be lived again that I didn't hear the door close behind me when I stepped into the kitchen that night. I heard a hinge shift inside me. The same room where I'd once caught their whispers, my daughter-in-law's thin blade of a sentence, she doesn't belong here. We'll find a way. Now smelled like lemon oil and roasted chicken, the aromas of normal life pretending nothing had happened. The clock over the stove, the one my husband had repaired a dozen times, ticked like a witness that would never lie. For weeks I'd floated through this house as a shadow with a grocery list, a babysitter, a quiet apology in every step. Tonight I brought something heavier, a decision I could no longer postpone. Hook, rehook, choose your poison. Here's mine. If you think endings arrive with fanfare, you haven't lived inside a family. Endings come as small signatures on papers, as boxes taped in the garage, as a mother choosing which picture frame to take and which to leave, knowing both will hurt. That's the kind of cliff we're standing on. By then I had done my homework. Grief counselors don't teach you how to argue. They teach you what safety sounds like. An elder law attorney had walked me through tenant-at-will statutes, rights of occupancy, and the difference between being helpful and being useful to the point of invisibility. A social worker had told me the data: multi-generational households work best when boundaries are written, not assumed. Unpaid caregiving from widowed parents correlates with quiet resentment if no end date is named. These weren't accusations. They were numbers, and numbers have the mercy of clarity. I made tea for all of us because heat steadies a table. My son arrived first, shoulders rounded, grief and guilt pulling in opposite directions. He was my boy in a man's suit, trying to please the room. My daughter-in-law came second, hair perfect, smile fixed at civil, hands folded like she was defending a test she hadn't studied for. The air between them was a secret they thought I couldn't see. But I've been married. I know the weight of withheld sentences. I've cooked, I said, then placed the envelope between the plates. Not a threat, an invitation to be honest with each other. Inside sat 3 copies of a written plan. Not a will, not a trap. Just the lines love needs if it hopes to survive the weather. The plan was simple. I would contribute financially to a defined list, utilities, groceries, part of the mortgage, for 3 months only. In return, I would keep the room that faced the maple tree. I would not be default childcare. I would have 2 evenings a week to myself. After 3 months, I would move into an apartment I'd already toured, small, bright, a bus route close to the library. The lease sat clipped behind the plan like a parachute. My son read it twice, swallowed hard, and nodded. He understood the cost of my decision because he shares my face, endurance dressed as calm. My daughter-in-law read it once and laughed softly, the sound you make when the rules stop being yours. So, you're leaving, she said. I'm choosing, I corrected. There's a difference. Curiosity gap. Here's another. I did not confront her with the recording from the night I heard the plan to solve the Eleanor problem. I did not present the text messages I could have printed, the complaints that used my name as a task. I did not litigate, because the more interesting story is what you don't weaponize. Besides, truth has a way of filling the room without an invitation. We ate in a stilted choreography. My grandson asked for extra bread. He is 8, and 8-year-olds understand a house by the height of the counters and the sound of bedtime. When he reached for my hand under the table, his fingers were sticky with honey. I squeezed once to say present, twice to say steady. He squeezed back 3 times, our quiet code for don't leave me. I did not flinch. I had already promised him I wouldn't. After dishes, I asked for 10 minutes alone with my son outside. The back porch boards still held a scuff from the day he and his father had carried a grill there 20 summers ago. I told him what no mother wants to say, that love can't grow in a room rented with resentment, that his wife's fear of being sidelined was real even when it was sharp, that my staying had become a kindness that hurt. He cried, quietly, the way men do when their hands don't know what to do without a broken thing to fix. I let him cry. A fact, in grief research, tears are metabolized stress. They physically change your blood chemistry. That night, a statistic saved a son from shame. Inside, my daughter-in-law waited with her arms folded so tightly the bracelets bit. If you think this is about money, she said, it isn't. I believed her. Every story of control wears money as a mask. Beneath it hides something softer and more afraid, that I was a mirror she didn't ask for, reflecting the future at her, widowhood, aging, the unphotographed work of care. I lowered my voice. I don't want your kitchen, I said. I want my life. She blinked first. It's unnerving when your opponent refuses the duel. Rehook, you're wondering what I did with the recording anyway, the one with the sentence that started this unraveling. I deleted it. Not because I'm noble. Because I needed one thing in this house that wasn't a receipt. The next morning I began to pack. Not the obvious things at first, no, that would have started a war. I packed small, safety pins, the measuring cups with the faded half cup, a notebook full of grocery math from the year we almost lost the house. Each object was an artery of memory. I labeled boxes with verbs instead of rooms: keep, give, bless, release. This is how you move without breaking yourself, by naming the motion. Research says older adults who curate their own downsizing report higher well-being than those whose moves are managed for them. So I curated. I did not keep the crystal, I kept the dented saucepan with the ghost of stew in its finish. I did not keep the anniversary china, I kept the chipped mug my husband used the morning he said, "We're going to be okay," and meant it. On my last night in that house, I cooked my husband's favorite meal. Grief is a chef that works with steam and memory. It makes a feast look like survival. We ate at the small table on the porch, city hum low, an early star hanging like punctuation. I gave my grandson a compass, real brass, heavier than it looked. If you ever feel lost, I told him, put this in your pocket and walk until your thoughts slow to its tick. He nodded, serious as a parson, then slipped it into the small drawer where boys keep marbles and impossible promises. Sleep didn't come. So I did what widows do at 2 a.m. I walked the rooms to say thank you. Thank you to the hallway for carrying bedtime feet. Thank you to the bathroom mirror for telling hard truths about fatigue and still letting lipstick try. Thank you to the laundry room for swallowing so many secrets and never speaking. Finally, the kitchen. The scene of the sentence that cracked me open and the table where we learned how to mend. I pressed my palm to the cool counter and forgave it for holding knives. Morning arrived with a humility I trusted. My son carried boxes without comment. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, arms uncrossed. I didn't know how to include you, she said, the closest thing to an apology some people can reach. I didn't know how to be included, I answered. 2 sentences that could have saved us months, delivered one day late. Families often arrive at wisdom on the wrong platform. The miracle is that they arrive at all. Before I left, I wrote 3 lists and taped them on the inside of a cabinet where only the cook would see. What helps? Schedule, shared calendars, questions asked before assumptions made, meals planned on Sundays, the name of a neighbor who can step in when everyone is tired. What hurts? Secrets in the kitchen, promises made on someone else's time, kindness treated like rent. What's next? Wednesdays at my place for soup, Saturdays at the park if it's sunny, grace for the days that backslide. Then I stepped into my new apartment with a single suitcase and the photo of my husband in a thrift store frame. The first sound was my own breathing. The first task was the kettle. Freedom is often shaped like a mug. My son arrived that evening with flowers that looked too formal for the small table. We laughed about it, the way people laugh when they both know they've survived something they can't yet name. He fixed my curtain rod. I showed him where the fuses lived. He hugged me at the door with both arms, his cheeks still boy-soft in one corner. Thank you, he said, and the room knew exactly what he meant. Alone again, I placed the compass on the windowsill and watched the last light outline it in gold. I thought of the kitchen sentence that began this story and how it had tried to exile me from the center of my own life. I thought of all the ways we make prisons out of politeness and how quietly keys are forged in the offices of social workers and the waiting rooms of counselors and the notebooks of widows who refuse to disappear. Here is the final hook, the one I won't resolve for you. Forgiveness is not furniture you move in a day. Some weeks it is a chair you sit in without noticing. Other weeks it is a box you keep tripping over in the hall. I haven't decided where to place it yet. But I have decided this: I will not carry it alone. If you've walked with me this far, you already know the ending isn't the apartment, or the plan, or even the quiet. The ending is a beginning, me, on a Tuesday, opening my front door to the smell of soup and the sound of a small knock I will always answer. The kettle will sing. The compass will tick. The future, at last, will choose my name and pronounce it out loud.